Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Michael Twyman. Good to have you on.
Glad to be here.
Let's start out with a few things about you that you consider important to know about yourself.
Well, I'm a board-certified cardiologist. I did 10 years of training after college, and somewhere near the end of my training, I figured out there might be a better way to promote longevity than just taking care of real sick people, and then ultimately dedicated my career to the prevention of heart attack and strokes.
Pretty cool.
Yes.
When was the switch happening for you from, let's say, the traditional cardiology to a more holistic approach, let's say?
Sure, and it was definitely a journey. So, there's 3 years of cardiovascular training you do, and I did a lot of invasive procedures during that training and really thought I was going to be an interventional cardiologist. The interventional cardiologists are the ones that, treat heart attacks. They stop heart attacks with, balloons and stents. And near the end of my 3rd year of training, had some family members who were having some, medical issues, nothing major, but they had seen a functional medicine doctor, and that doctor had recommended that they, try a gluten-free diet. And when they did that, then the person's migraines, their GI symptoms, and their arthralgias all got better. And I was like, well, that's interesting because I'd never heard that gluten was a problem. I didn't receive a whole lot of nutrition training in my conventional training. So went deep down the rabbit hole of looking into functional medicine near the end of my training and said, well, how about I not go do the extra year of interventional cardiology and I'll just start out in practice, be a general cardiologist and, do the things I learned, but kept teaching myself along the way and, kept going to different conferences and coming up with different mentors that would teach me more things about, lipoproteins and then different types of testing to look at endothelial function, which is, basically how healthy your arteries are. And so that was kind of my introduction. Then later, I got the rock and blue blocking glasses. That was kind of the next rabbit hole was, stumbling upon circadian biology, Dr. Jack Cruz, and in the quantum health world. So been doing that pretty deeply since 2017. And then in 2019, decided to combine my conventional cardiology training, all the functional integrative cardiology, and then all the quantum medicine I've been learning, and then started my own practice. And that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years now.
So what's the endothelium? Can you give us the basics?
Sure. It's definitely one of my favorite topics to discuss with people because it's critical to having optimal cardiovascular health. So the endothelium is the inner lining of your blood vessels. The endothelium is 1 cell thick. And if you were able to strip out your endothelium from all your blood vessels, it would be about the surface area of 6 tennis courts. So it's actually your largest secretory organ. One of the major things that the endothelium does is it releases a gas called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule. It actually won the Nobel Prize for Medicine back in 1998 for its discovery. And nitric oxide, when it is diffused from the artery wall, will cause the muscle and artery to relax. That improves blood flow, that keeps blood pressure normal. But nitric oxide also acts as kind of like a non-stick signal. So when there's high levels of nitric oxide, the lipoproteins, which are ferrying your cholesterol through the blood vessels, they don't stick to the artery wall. The white blood cells don't stick to the artery wall. The platelets, which you want to clump together and form a clot when you're bleeding, don't stick to the artery wall. So nitric oxide is critical for arterial health. I've been sitting up on top of the endothelium, something that was discovered about 50 years ago, but it's only been in the past couple of years that we've had imaging technology that could actually discover how it actually works, is the endothelial glycocalyx. It's a protective gel coating for the endothelium. And it's when that gel coat gets damaged, that's when you're likely to be set up for things going wrong in artery walls. And this can happen in people's teens or 20s. So you have a long time to intervene before they show up in somebody's cath lab in their 50s, 60s.
Right. Most people get a heart attack at around 60. And how does that exactly happen? Is it just that one layer that gets damaged, or is there more to it?
Sure. And, it's somewhat of a thinking of like the artery is more like a garden hose. So there's where the water is flowing, and then there's the artery wall itself. And the plaque is forming in the artery wall. So it's not so much that the arteries just fill up full of sludge and, it's like a block of pipe. It's more that the artery wall gets damaged. So that gel coat gets damaged, the endothelium gets damaged. Then the lipoproteins, the white blood cells, they start sticking to the artery wall, kind of like Velcro. And once they get stuck there, the immune system gets activated. The immune system basically thinks bacteria is attacking it and starts gobbling this stuff up. And that starts the plaque to build up in the artery wall. Eventually, the body will try to scar it down, form calcifications on it, try to take care of it. And that's a stabilizing factor. But if the plaque is allowed to build up and it's not stabilized, there's more risk that that plaque will rupture. You think of it almost like a pimple or like a little volcano in the artery wall. Once it ruptures, it spills out into the bloodstream, and then the body basically thinks it's bleeding, and a blood clot will form at that location to seal it. Now that blood clot's going to block all the oxygen nutrients downstream, and without oxygen nutrients, that tissue will start dying. So if this happens in your heart, that's a heart attack. If it's in the brain, that's a stroke. So that's how the majority of heart attacks and strokes happen, is that it's one of these plaques that, for the most part, people generally don't have any symptoms with until it ruptures.
So is it fair to say that a heart attack in that instance is the body's failed attempt to actually heal itself?
In many ways, yes. I mean, that there's infinite insults for the artery lining, but there's really only three responses. There's oxidative stress, there's inflammation, and there's autoimmune dysregulation. So one of those three processes is going to happen, and the body is trying to repair the damage. But if the damage continues to go on, it just cascades and then leads to this event. So sometimes the analogy is that, like, the lipoproteins, they're the firemen. They're coming to try to help take care of the damage, but they kind of get rolled up and stuck in this damage process, and then the plaques continue to grow. So it's not necessarily the lipoproteins that are the only thing causing the problem. There has to be endothelial dysfunction and inflammation present as well.
You haven't talked about cholesterol in that explanation.
Right, because I'm using the correct term, which is the lipoproteins.
Okay.
So cholesterol, for those that don't know enough about it yet, it's a very waxy molecule. And because of its structure, it cannot float in the liquid blood. So that would be like oil and vinegar. So the body will make something called a lipoprotein, a lipid protein carrier. So I typically use a tennis ball as the analogy. So the cholesterol goes inside the tennis ball. The triglycerides, which are energy, go inside the cargo ship, the tennis ball. There's different fat-soluble vitamins, the A's, the D's, the E's, the K's, and then phospholipids, which are building blocks for the cells. They all go inside the tennis ball. The liver pumps them out, sends them through the blood vessels to the organs that need things. So most of it's energy, so it's the triglycerides. So the muscles are going to grab onto these things and download the triglycerides for energy. But some of the organs, the gonads and such, they're going to take some of the cholesterol out and make some of your sex hormones and such. So cholesterol by itself is not the problem. Without cholesterol, you would not be alive. But because cholesterol is waxy, it's just not going to float into your liquid blood. It goes inside a lipoprotein. And that's the only way it's going to get into your artery wall, is that one of these lipoproteins got stuck to the artery because the artery was inflamed, there's endothelial dysfunction, and then the cholesterol that was in that lipoprotein basically gets illegally dumped into the artery wall.
Okay. So what are some symptoms of the body in general that show, okay, the endothelium is starting to deteriorate?
It's sometimes a little bit challenging without doing some other testing, but at home it may be that you have really cold hands or feet. There's kind of like Raynaud's symptoms. You can have elevated blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is greater than 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury, that indicates that your arteries can't fully relax. You could have just brain fog. You could have fatigue. You could have exercise intolerance. And then for men, it sometimes shows up as erectile dysfunction. They can't initiate or maintain an erection because the blood vessels can't pump out enough nitric oxide to bring blood flow to the penis. So endothelial dysfunction often is not well picked up initially, but it's kind of these low-level symptoms that say, like, there's something going on with the blood vessels. Because everything for the most part, will get better if you can get enough oxygen and blood flow into the tissue and you can get the waste products out of the tissue.
So what do you do then to prevent it?
That's always a good question. Yeah, preventing is much easier than fixing it. But the gel coat was very fragile to high blood sugars, high insulin, high stress, so high cortisol levels will damage it. If you're not sleeping well, there's going to be effects with it. I don't think too many people are smoking cigarettes anymore, but a lot of people are sometimes using vapes. Those can also damage it. It's the heavy metals and other combustibles that are in the vapes that damage that gel coat. Different viruses can damage it. So anything that is floating through your bloodstream has the potential to damage the gel coat. And then there's things you can do to try to repair it. So.
And is there like a general kind of lifestyle that you would recommend people follow to stay healthy for a very long time? Sure,
and it always does start with kind of 4 pillars of health. There's more, but everybody's going to initially probably focus on the exercise and nutrition. I tell you, those are important, but you also have to manage the other 2 pillars that I consider extremely important for optimal health, and that's going to be your stress management and your sleep. I always start with sleep first, because if you don't sleep well, it almost doesn't matter what you do for the other things, because your body repairs itself when you sleep. So this is something else I always frequently when I talk about with people, it's your mitochondrial health. So your mitochondria, they'll do more things than they're going to do for you, but that's a pretty good job that they have. Your mitochondria are your engines. You repair those engines when you sleep. So if you don't have healthy engines, and then you keep just trying to shove in premium gas food to them, they're not going to make the energy that you want. So focus on optimizing your sleep, and that's mostly about getting your circadian rhythms in check, timing your meals in check, and then having a routine. The body loves routines. Now, the third pillar of stress, everybody has stress in their life. Stress is ubiquitous. You would not exist without stress. But there's 2 branches of your autonomic nervous system. There's your sympathetic, which is your fight or flight response. Sometimes we call that the gas. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's your rest relaxation response, or the break. So it's normal to kind of be pumping throughout the day, and usually a little bit higher on the sympathetic. But there's some people that are completely sympathetically dominant, and they've turned off the break. And they're just stuck in fight or flight mode all the time. You need that when the tiger is chasing you, but if you're always pegged up higher in the sympathetic tone, your body's going to wear out faster, and if you're pumping all this adrenaline and cortisol through your blood vessels, you're trying to get blood to your muscles, to your brain. All that high cortisol and high pressures is going to start damaging the gel coat of the arteries, that collateral calyx. So chronically unmitigated stress is not a good thing. So, yes, you want to stress your body with exercise and then recover. And yes, you want to do taxing mental activities, but then recover. So that's really the trick, is sometimes teaching people how to train the parasympathetic side of things. And those are going to be the things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, for the biohackers, it's heart math and Apollo Neuro, kind of the more common ones that people play around with. But that's something that, focus on those 2 things first, and then I can dial back and say, okay, what are you interested in on a nutrition standpoint? What are your goals? Exercise, where are they at, and what are their goals?
Can we go into more specifics for the sleep? So
Sure.
Let's say, first, what happens if somebody's has chronic insomnia? So doesn't sleep very little, up really late. What happens in the body, and especially to the arteries?
The short answer is you'll age faster. Your body needs sleep to repair the damage. So, you have to first look at it. Is it a problem falling asleep? Is it a problem staying asleep? Or is it both? And as you mentioned, if it's people are staying up late, well, what is late? If you really pay attention to your circadian rhythms and you pay attention to the light cycles that Mother Nature provides, you're generally not going to be awake at 11 o'clock at night. You want to get, the majority of your sleep should happen, where you at least are asleep between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's when the body, makes the most growth hormone and does most of the repair. So you really want to focus on getting an optimal routine by having a set wake-up time 7 days a week, whatever that wake-up time is for you. Ideally, it's going to be around the time of the sunrise or a little bit before that. Your bedtime can vary based off of your social obligations, but keep getting up at the same time and let the body be entrained for that time. Now, if you're more tired the next day because you're getting enough sleep, fine, go to bed earlier, but keep getting up at the same time to set that rhythm.
And what about the blue light?
Yeah, that's often one that, is sometimes a little bit challenging, that some people say, well, all blue light is bad. That's actually not true. It's unmitigated blue light is the issue. So we evolved under full spectrum sunlight. So ideally, the first light that you'd see during the day would be sunlight. So you go outside, nothing between your eyes and the skies, that light would hit your eyes, and you have a receptor in the back of the eyes called melanopsin. It's a blue light detector. The sky is blue for that particular reason. Your eyes can keep sampling the sky and determining what time of day it is based off the color that the sky is. The sky is a different color at noon than it is right before it sets. When the sun sets, the blue light basically goes away and the sun is red as it's setting. The receptor in the eye realizes there's no more blue light. It must be going into nighttime. And then basically starts clocking your body that you're probably going to go to bed 3 to 4 hours after that time. And up until the late 1800s, that's what would have happened. Or you would have had fire at night. You would have, candles or fireplaces, and the red light, maybe you stayed up a little bit longer, but it wouldn't have prolonged it. But once they started inventing artificial lighting, and more people spend more time inside, their eyes get confused at what time of day it is. The technology that we're currently communicating over basically is set at the same color temperature as solar noon. So when you look at these devices with your eyes not protected, your brain is going to think it's noontime. You're going to keep levels of cortisol high. That's an alertness hormone. But the hormone that you need to sleep, melatonin, that's going to be suppressed. The melatonin hormone doesn't really come out until there's about 3 to 4 hours of darkness. So the glasses that I'm currently wearing, these are kind of the daytime lenses. They let some blue light through, but they don't let all the blue light from the computer screens come through. So my brain is not confused what time of day it is.
Right. I'm a fan of those glasses too. I'm not wearing them right now because I have the filter on my computer, but life is so much better with them. So, well, how do you get your I'm assuming you have patients that can't sleep, right? So what do you specifically recommend to them to balance their circadian rhythm?
Sure. So, I always kind of go through kind of what an ideal day would be, is that you would be up before sunrise or around that time. If you're up before sunrise, which I am, I protect my eyes. I wear my glasses when I'm inside. But my house is very circadian rhythm friendly. It's all natural lighting. I have, full spectrum bulbs if I want, bright light, or I just have red LED bulbs if I want kind of like task lighting. So I control my light environment very, to minute detail. But the first light that a person should really see should be sunlight. So if you're not sleeping well, it always starts with morning light. So, there's, on your phone, there's usually going to be some type of app that's going to tell you your weather, but it's also going to tell you the time that the sun rises in your local environment. You want to be inside within that first half hour of the sun breaking horizon. I often ask the question, do you have to actually see the sun rise? No. I mean, some people are going to be in valleys and not going to be able to see the sun break the horizon. You just have to be outside and sampling that information in your eyes. Then, you should ideally eat your first meal of the day within an hour of that sun rising. That meal is information to the GI system that, hey, it's daytime. We're going to be out hunting now. Let's go. Let's go do what we need to do for the day. And then, if you're drugged inside, control your light environment the best you can. At minimum, wear glasses if you can't control that environment. And then have a kind of wind down routine at night where you're not so digitally, connected. Your brain is not supposed to be wired up 24/7 on these devices. You need a period of time off them, or at least, not be so stimulated by them. So again, there's filters that work on the computer to dial out some of the blue light, but they're not sufficient if you're having sleep issues. You have to actually physically block the light. And then having a meal no more than 3 hours before bed so that the liver and gut can shut off for the night. And then go to bed in a bedroom that's dark, cold, and quiet, electrically quiet too. So try to keep your cell phones out of the bedroom or keep them on airplane mode because you want your mitochondria to recover. You don't want them to basically be pinged with a bunch of EMF all night long while you're trying to sleep. So if you keep setting up the routine, the sleep hygiene, the sleep quality tends to improve. And at this point, I personally do not wear any sleep trackers, but if you're first starting out with this, it may not be a bad idea to have a sleep tracker. There are ones that you can keep in airplane mode because you don't want Bluetooth on pinging you again all night with EMF. So some of the ones that I think are kind of better quality ones would be the Oura Ring or the there's something called the BioStrap. It's even probably more sensitive for certain other metrics than the Oura Ring, but both work well. And monitor, what your temperature is while you sleep, your respiratory rate, your heart rate variability, and then we'll try to calculate, your time in bed plus the deep sleep and the REM sleep. And are they super accurate? They're relatively, but there's going to be times where they're not going to pick up everything. So we just want to see, is your baseline changing from your baseline? After a while, you should have kind of a game where, like, when you wake up in the morning, you should have an idea how well you slept. And once you dial in what was breaking it, you don't necessarily need to keep tracking the sleep.
Right. You should wake up refreshed and clear-headed. That's the goal.
Correct. You should have the energy that you need to run the rest of the day.
And so you mentioned EMFs in the bedroom. Can you explain what those do to the body and, like, especially the mitochondria?
Sure. So electromagnetic frequencies, are all around us. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the cell signals. There's magnetic fields, there's electrical fields. So your body just bathes in them. So we only can see certain, wavelengths of light with our eyes, but our body is sensing all the other wavelengths. So many people have had an X-ray at some point in their life. So you could not see the X-ray, but the X-ray penetrated right through you, and then they developed the film on the other side that was behind you. Your mitochondria are sitting in between those different wavelengths. And the mitochondria are very sensitive to electric EMFs because bacteria have thinner walls than eukaryote cells. And mitochondria essentially are bacteria that, our eukaryote cells kind of usurp. I don't know exactly how many years ago, but hundreds of thousands of years ago, we basically stole the mitochondria and put them in their cells. But they're very, very sensitive to EMFs. So 2 analogies that I tend to use is one, the game in life is about collecting electrons and not losing electrons. So if you have electrons flowing through your mitochondria, you'll be able to make energy. But when your body is exposed to different EMFs, those devices will steal the electrons from you. You will not have the electrons to make the energy. That's one way to think about it. The second way to think about it is that EMFs will cause calcium to come rushing into the cell. That's a cell signal of danger to the cell. It will cause the cell to swell. It will also affect nitric oxide, or push things from the productive way to make nitric oxide to create actually nitrics, which can be very oxidative and cause issues to the cells. So the 2 ways to think about it are either it's going to cause cell danger signal and calcium coming in the cell, or we think about like you're losing electrons to the environment faster than you can hold on to them.
Okay. So basically they signal stress to the body, and when there's too much stress without recovery, the body deteriorates.
Okay,
so also
faster.
Right. What should a person that already had a heart attack do? Is there anything specific? And also a person that just had a heart attack, and also maybe somebody who has a stand-in and something similar?
It's a really good question. Is that, typically there's primary prevention, meaning you're trying to help somebody not have their first event, a heart attack or stroke. And then there's secondary prevention. And that was what I was mainly trained in, was treating people who already had their first event. And we're just trying to prevent them from having further events. And this is the space where antiplatelet agents, cholesterol-lowering medications, blood pressure medications, they're throwing the kitchen sink at some of these people to put the 5-alarm fire out in their arteries. And in those cases, those medicines can put the fire out so that they don't have their second event. But there is kind of a gray zone between people who are primary and secondary prevention. Because just because you haven't had an event doesn't mean that you're low risk. Because if you don't actually go looking at the arteries, you'll have no idea what's going on in them. So just looking at somebody from the outside doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy. Just because they exercise or eat all organic doesn't mean that their arteries are healthy. They could have high lipoprotein A, they could have heavy metal exposures, and their glycocalyx got really damaged. You don't know. So you have to go testing the endothelial function. You have to look at artery inflammation, the blood work, and then there's other non-invasive imaging tests that you can look at the cardiovascular system. But I was going to break it back down to, how healthy is the endothelium and the glycocalyx? Because that's the first sign that that's the problem. If that coating gets damaged, the process kicks off and the plaques can form. The plaques rupture. One of my new venture colleagues will go in there, deploy a stent, and they'll seal it back, open, and then the flow improves. But it's literally a Band-Aid. They stent it, 10 to 30 millimeters of your arteries. You have 60,000 miles of blood vessels that still need to be treated. So you have to figure out what broke that person's endothelial function to begin with and remove that if you can. And if you still can't figure it out, then start supporting the body with different supplements and medications to try to get that gel coat to start healing back up. Because once the gel coat is healed, then you don't kick off the cascade where the second event or the third event will happen.
And which medications would be good for that?
So if we go down kind of the traditional pharmacological agents, it's going to be the ACE inhibitors and the angiotensin receptor blockers are going to help with endothelial function. And then the statin medications, they sometimes get villainized that statins are tools, and their best use case is if people already had an event. You're putting out the 5-alarm fire. That they lower cholesterol, yes, it's important, but it's more that it lowers inflammation. It helps keep the endothelium healthier. Any plaque that's still remaining, it prevents it from being a soft on fire plaque and tends to make it a more firm, solid plaque that tends not to rupture. So you're putting the fire out with those medications. And then there are a whole host of nutraceuticals that can support pushing up more nitric oxide levels. There's things that can support the glycocalyx if it's damaged. It basically regrows the glycocalyx. So, doing some non-invasive testing, blood work, and comes to how aggressive you need to be at supplementing or adding pharmacological agents to the regimen.
And in case of diet, what do you recommend there?
So diet's always one of the challenging ones. If people follow me on social media, they realize that I stay out of the diet wars because the diet wars are not super useful at promoting optimal health when people villainize the way a person's eating. Food is information. Food is energy. So the way I like to approach it is more of a circadian rhythm friendly type of approach initially, and then we dial into what that person's goals are. So I always start the same way with everybody. Your goal is to eat during daylight hours. That's when your body's optimized to get that nutrition in. You do not want to be eating more than 3 hours before bed because that's going to require your liver and gut to digest that food. That's going to cause your body's temperature to be higher. And the higher your body temperature, the harder it is to have optimal sleep. You want your body temperature to go down to have better sleep. So don't eat too close to bed. Also, we're not living in the same environment. So what my nutrition plan should be this time of year versus somebody who's living on the equator is going to be different. So this is where your maternal haplotype comes in. The type of mitochondria you have, someone can dictate what nutrition regimen you might better be served to do. But for the most part, people should be following a seasonal type of approach, where you eat foods that are what your great ancestors would have had access to. So if you have 4 seasons and there's a dark, cold period where you live, well, there's not going to be a lot of vegetables and fruits growing that time of year, so you would not have had access to them. So you would have been eating more, quote, keto or carnivore that time of year. And then in the spring, summer, when the vegetables and fruits come back out, that's when you would start eating more carbs. So carbs by themselves are not good or bad, they're just what they are, but they're basically stored up sunlight. And you want your body to decode that sunlight in the right seasons.
I like that you said there's stored sunlight. What kind of information is in there?
So, when you eat food, it should be basically a photosynthetic process that you're basically reversing. So the sun grows the plants through photosynthesis. You eat the plant, you decode that information. Or you eat the animal that ate the plant. So it's mostly about, again, the electron story. So you're not eating carbs, you're not eating fats, you're eating things that have a lot of electrons in them. So fats have more electrons in them, carbohydrates have more energy, let's say higher energy electrons in them. And when the body breaks these things down, they get put into the mitochondria. They get funneled through the electron transport chain, the ETC. You have 5 kind of stations. Sometimes it's useful to think of them as like, skipping points, or, like little rocks in the water. So, the electrons come in and they play hopscotch and they pass them through. And at the end, there's this spinning top. And the faster the spinning top goes, the more ATP gets pumped out the other side. Water, carbon dioxide, and heat all get made in this process as well. So your game is basically collecting these electrons through nutrition, but we didn't think about it. You can also get electrons through grounding and earthing. You can get electrons from sunlight hitting your skin and liberating electrons in the water that's in your body. So there's other ways to get electrons than just eating them. So that's why I get out of the diet wars, because you just really think about, you're basically trying to collect the electrons and get them into your mitochondria to process the energy.
So this is a personal question. Which one is your favorite way to gather the electrons for yourself?
Favorite way? I think everybody's going to say eating is their favorite way because it's pleasurable, it's a social event. But before we start recording, I think some of my favorite places to travel, I really like to hang out down in like the Yucatan, Cancun type region, because the electron gathering is extremely efficient there. Earthing and grounding, is better because, the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs, dug a big crater out near there, and so the Earth's magnetic core is closer to the surface there, so the grounding is more efficient there. They have very good seafood down there, and they have a very strong, stable light cycle. So when you're outside, grounded on the beach, soaking up full spectrum light throughout the day, you probably notice your appetite is not that high because you're collecting that much energy and electrons from the environment. You don't have to eat as many electrons that day.
Oh, that's true. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's always a kind of a light bulb moment for many people that they think it's just because they're on vacation, they're not doing the usual work or whatever, but that's how your body is designed to charge up. And you can't really, can you store electrons? You can store electrons in your body fat, but no, this is a game that you're supposed to play every day. You're supposed to charge up your battery every day, sleep, and dissipate the battery the next day. Sleep, discharge the battery the next day.
Oh, and what about the magnetic field? So, where do you start there? Because I don't really know much about it.
So, anywhere where electrons are flowing 90 degrees to it, there's going to be a magnetic field. And so people probably understand what a refrigerator magnet is. So when something is negative and positively charged, they attract. When they're both the same charge, they repel. So on an earthing and grounding is probably the easiest way to think about the magnetic field. So as you're standing on the earth, you're absorbing the electrons through your extremities. That's because the earth has a magnetic field. In the cardiovascular system, the endothelial lining, it's very heavy with sulfated water. So this is an exclusion zone water. It's structured water. That's very negatively charged. So on the outside of your red blood cells, on the outside of your lipoproteins, there's a negative charge. Negative repels negative. So you have a magnetic field inside your blood vessels. It's like a maglev train. Those lipoproteins are supposed to slide on by. But when there's oxidative stress, inflammation, autoimmune dysregulation, and that glycocalyx gets damaged, becomes more positively charged, that attracts those negatively charged lipoproteins to that area.
So basically, instead of repelling, they collapse, correct?
Correct. Yeah. That's what's thought now.
That's so interesting. So I heard that also the blood flow inside the arteries is kind of because of that exclusion zone water, it's kind of pushed along. So there is that thought that the heart is not actually the main pump of the vascular system, but more like a helper. Have you heard about this?
Correct. That's there's a book from Dr. Cohen that has that information in it, that the heart is, yes, it's a pump, but it's not a pump that would be strong enough to push the blood through the entirety of the 60,000 miles of blood vessels. So it's a potential, and this is still all theoretical, that the heart is also more of a vortex that is basically accelerating the blood out of the pump into the vascular system. And if the vascular system has a very healthy negative charge, that blood just zips on by and slides on by. But if you know that, like, the heart is, by weight, approximately 1/3 of it is mitochondria. So if the mitochondria are not making energy efficiently, then the heart can't pump and vortex well, or the heart can't relax well. So it actually costs more energy for the heart to relax than it does to pump. So this is why it's important to mind your mitochondria, because if your mitochondria start to fail, depending where they fail is where you get the problems. If it's your heart gets weakened or stiffer, or you develop plaque in the arteries, you develop heart rhythm issues such as atrial fibrillation. If it's in your brain, you potentially develop things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So it's just a brownout of information, and the mitochondria start shutting down.
Is the magnetic field of the heart also doing something related to that?
Possibly, and there are some companies that are developing some devices to be able to measure the magnetic field off the heart. So for those who've had a EKG or an electrocardiogram before, they put the little stickers over your chest. They're measuring the electrical fields as they come off the heart. But if you actually step back and think about it, where does this electricity come from? It's coming from the mitochondria. But there are magnetic fields that leave the body maybe up to 22 feet. And there are certain devices, mostly in research facilities, that can measure that magnetic field. This is kind of not the woo, but this is sort of like, if you're putting out these large fields in front of you, this may be one of the reasons why you were literally attracted to certain people and repelled from certain people. It's their energy that you were actually sensing. But there is a company that has them in certain emergency rooms where they will start using this magnetic scanner to measure the magnetic field that comes off the heart. I haven't had personal access to one of these devices yet. I'm interested, and I'm trying to get some more information about it. But it would have a pattern that this is normal magnetic fields off the heart, or this is one where the heart magnetic fields are wrong and abnormal, and this person needs to get into the hospital and get further worked up. So I think it's a interesting piece of gear, technology that's coming that we might be able to start offering patients.
How soon do you think that type of technology will be?
It's already rolled out in certain hospitals around the world. I just don't think it's rolled out that much in the United States. And so that's loops around that. So I'm trying to figure out if I can get access to one of these devices around that.
Yeah, that's cool. What about the heart variability? So first, what is it? What does it do? Why is it important?
So back to the 4 pillars of health. One of them is stress management, or just stress in general. Heart rate variability is a metric of how much stress your body's sensing at that moment. So your heart rate is just, you measure your pulse and you're counting the beats, how many beats in a minute. The heart rate variability is an inverse of that number. So it's the time measured in milliseconds between consecutive heartbeats. So as your body is sensing the environment, you're always trying to figure out, is it time for more gas or more brake? So as you breathe in, your heart rate variability will go down as your heart rate increases. If you breathe out and the heart rate goes down, the heart rate variability expands. So your heart rate doesn't stay at 70 beats a minute. It has a swing on it. And so for the most part, your heart rate should kind of go from 70 to 90 to 60. Your body is just getting information from the environment, stimulating the vagus nerve through various means, and deciding how it's going to respond to the environment. So there are a lot of inputs for your heart rate variability. There are a lot of them are genetic, and you're not going to be able to change them. But heart rate variability in some instances can be a good metric of, okay, your body's overstressed, and you have to figure out what's stressing the body and try to remove that. So heart rate variability, can be measured with these different, trackers and such. And I get questions often like, my heart rate really is low. What do I do about it? Well, first, is there a readily apparent reason why your heart rate is really, really low? You have not been sleeping well. You're eating meals too late. You're over-exercising. Athletes will use this here. They're overtraining. Are you coming down with an infection? Oftentimes your heart rate variability will change a day or two before you clinically to start feeling ill. Your body is sensing that it's getting sick and it's starting to ramp up the immune system. So it can be kind of like a check engine light, an early warning sign that something's going on. But there are some people that are just going to have a naturally low heart rate rate. That doesn't necessarily mean bad things are coming from them.
Yeah, that's just different people. It's a big world, right?
Yeah, I personally have very low heart rate rate. I'm fairly sure it's genetic in me. But when I compare my sleep to people of my age, I'm in the 99th percentile. There's very few people that sleep better than me, so I'll take that over having a perfect heart rate variability anything.
Sleep is so important. So having a high heart rate variability is generally a good thing, correct?
In general, yes. And the way this came from was, patients who had heart attacks who are in the hospital. After a heart attack, there's increased risk of having deadly heart rhythms. So they will have them on telemetry, so they're watching their heart rate, throughout the day. And they were measuring people's heart rate variability. And the patients who had low heart rate variability, they had more morbidity and mortality at 30 days, meaning they had further heart attacks or they actually died more than the people who had normal or optimal heart rate variability during their hospitalization after an event. So it's really useful for people who are sick in measuring it, but I don't know if you can always extrapolate it to kind of the young biohacker, health optimizer that the heart rate variability is low versus high isn't a problem. It's more about is your heart rate variability baseline changing from your baseline? That's the concern.
Okay. Basically, are you improving or are you worsening?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned nitric oxide before, and that it helps repel things inside the endothelium, correct?
Correct.
Can you go into a little bit more detail on how it is made, things that affect the secretion, and all of those things?
It's a very good question. So nitric oxide, is made on the lining of the arteries. The body will convert arginine with an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, EMFs for short, and then we'll convert it over to citrulline. And nitric oxide gets kicked off in the process. But after the age of 40 or so, that enzyme becomes less efficient. So think of it like a thermostat. You're not going to be at 100% efficiency anymore. You start dialing it back. You're still going to be making nitric oxide, just not as much. But the body has a built-in backup pathway through an oral salivary pathway. So you have bacteria in your saliva that produce nitrates. So nitrates are mostly going to be found in green leafy vegetables, spinach, kale, arugula, and beets. So when you would eat one of these compounds, nitrate-reducing bacteria in your saliva will break it down into nitrites. You will swallow it. It will go into your stomach, and then through some conversions, it will ultimately end up as nitric oxide. But many people will use antiseptic mouthwash, or they'll use fluorinated toothpaste. They could interfere with the oral microbiome. You destroy the bacteria that can make that conversion, you can't rely on it then. And then there's people who are on proton pump inhibitors or chronic acid blocking medications. If you do not have stomach acid, you cannot break down protein effectively. You cannot make enzymes effectively. So you're going to start affecting endothelial nitric oxide synthase enzymes if you continually block stomach acid. So, if you have a stomach ulcer, you have H. pylori infection, sure, be on acid blocking medicine for the prescribed amount of time. But you just do not want to be on these things for years and years and years because they're going to lead to endothelial dysfunction, high blood pressure, and potentially worsening things going on in the arteries. So, you can basically make nitric oxide through these two pathways, and often my job is just to figure out where it's breaking down in the patient and help support them.
And is there anything specific that you can do for the nitric oxide, or is it just the holistic approach and then the nitric oxide just like balances itself out?
That's always the goal, is that you just try to remove the offending agents and let the body get back to its natural baseline. There's other things that you can do that, before you start going down the supplement and medication route. It's getting proper UVA sun exposure. So when UVA light hits your skin, it's going to liberate nitric oxide from the blood vessels. When you exercise, blood is going to rush into your arteries, go into your muscles. That blood is going to be transduced by the glycocalyx, the endothelium. It's basically sending information that here comes a big slug of blood to the muscles. We need to dilate to be able to accept this blood flow. That's going to liberate nitric oxide. And then I just mentioned earlier, that your dark green leafy vegetables and your beets that have nitrates in them. Those are the kind of the free things you can do to boost nitric oxide. And then there's a couple different companies that have products that can either directly release nitric oxide when they dissolve in your saliva, or they're capsules that when you swallow them, they have the precursors that will make nitric oxide then.
Okay. You mentioned before about the bacteria in the mouth. I've read that there is a high correlation between just inflammation in mouth, gum disease, and heart attack. What do you know about that?
That's a very good observation, and that's something that I've been looking at the past few years as well. There's a large oral systemic link. So, if there's inflammation in the system, well, you're going to transmit those interleukins and cytokines through those 60,000 miles of blood vessels. So oftentimes the blood vessels are the innocent bystander getting beat up from that inflammation from gingivitis or a root canal that's gone wrong. So in my practice, that's in my questionnaire is like, when's the last time you've seen your dentist? Anything going on with your oral health right now? There's certain blood tests we can do that if they have high LP-PLA2, sometimes I have some marker that there's oral inflammation. So I'd say you got to go back to your dentist, make them check your gums out, make sure there's nothing going on in your system. Because it was many years ago that they used to aspirate plaques out when people were having heart attacks and would analyze what was in the plaque. And often they would find dead bacteria that were the bacteria that would only be found in the oral microbiome. And so it's suspected that those bacteria didn't necessarily make the plaques explode or rupture.
The plaques in the arteries, correct? Not the plaque on the teeth.
Correct. The plaque in the arteries had the bacteria that were from the teeth. So you know that there's the connection that if you're having inflammation from your mouth, it's affecting your coronary arteries as well.
Wow. It's wild. You also mentioned heavy metals. How do they affect the endothelial health?
They basically will damage the enzymes that protect the glycocalyx, but they also can directly poison mitochondria, and then the body is not going to make as much energy without that. The big ones that tend to affect the cardiovascular system are going to be mercury, lead, and arsenic. And there's different companies that you can do that can look at urine heavy metal loads, because that's kind of a little bit better marker of kind of your chronic exposure. If you've been acutely exposed, then the blood level would be more useful. And then there are people that would do propagation testing where you give them a chelating agent, and then you repeat the urine test to see if the chelating agent pulls some of the heavy metals more out of the tissues and the bones, and then you get a better idea of okay, what is this person's chronic exposure to these substances.
And how would somebody chelate the metals?
That's a good question, and that's not an area of my expertise. I have to vouch for that. But there are different IV chelation protocols. But for the most part, I will recommend people who are diabetic consider IV chelation, because that's the population that has actually shown the most benefit. So I was through the TACT trial, TACT, where they were studying IV chelation, and the people who actually had benefit. And it's not so much that, the thought that, chelation was pulling the plaques out of the arteries. That's not what it's happening. It's pulling the metals out. That decreases the oxidation and inflammatory load, and then the body gets to work at doing the repair. but it was really only the diabetics that had the main benefits. So they're doing repeat studies called the TAC2 trial, and that's still ongoing.
That's really interesting that it's the most effective for diabetics.
Because it's basically the high glucose load is the main thing that's damaging the glycocalyx. So they're more prone to having endothelial dysfunction.
I see. Okay. Another personal question.
Sure.
Which part of the body fascinates you the most and why?
I mean, it had to be hard because I've dedicated my career to it so far, but really I think the brain's going to be something that people are going to really start trying to figure out over the next 10, 20 years. Definitely not my area of expertise, but I go more by like how I feel with it. And so I like to do different biohacks to see how well I can get my brain to function. So I played around with brain photomodulation. I have a different helmet and put different infrared wavelengths applied into the brain at different frequencies to see if you can get different responses. I've done neurofeedback. I've meditated daily. Done biofeedback. I've played around with different nootropics, including methylene blue. And usually we get that extra gear with methylene blue because it helps cycle electrons in your mitochondria so you can make energy more efficiently. So I think things that can help your brain performance is really going to be something that I'm going to be focusing on for the next 10 years. The hard stuff, I think I've already figured it out for the most part. So.
Yes, you had quite a few decades already behind you with that. Oh, are there any side effects with methylene blue?
There are if you're on an MAO inhibitor, so if people on certain antidepressants, they have to be careful. If you have a G6PD deficiency, which is a genetic abnormality on how your red blood cells are formed, but there's very few contraindications for it. It's generally relatively safe at the lower doses. People just don't want to be going to the high dose. They're trying to get more than a gram per pound of their body weight. They're going to probably start getting into trouble.
Okay. Is it possible?
A pound per kilogram.
Okay.
Gram per kilogram. Yes.
Is it possible to take out stents or balloons that people had put in after several years or whatever?
So it's somewhat of the evolution of cornea interventions is pretty fascinating. So in the heart attack have been happening since there's been humans, but treatment for it up until the 70s was mostly supportive care. People would have heart attacks. They maybe give them some oxygen, they give them some pain medicine, but they mostly make them do bed rest, so they didn't do a lot of stress to the system. And the body would just have a heart attack, and they were hoping that person would live through it. And that's basically the standard of care. Then they could start affecting the blood pressure a little bit, but then the uptick came in to where they created the CCU, the cardiac care units, where people could be monitored. So when they would have one of these abnormal heart rhythms, they could go there and quickly shock them back into a normal rhythm. The cath labs then started to be able to do angioplasties. That was in the late 70s and 80s, so using a balloon to open up a plaque in the artery. But one of the things is you'd open up the plaque, but the artery would often recoil back in, and then the artery would but it would restenoze in short order, and they'd have to go back in there again. So then they invented a metal structure, Dr. Kamaz did, that would open the artery and stay in the artery. Actually, I got to meet his wife at one point, and I got to hear the whole story of how he would come up the stent. It was something that he was having some work done in his house, and they were doing some brickwork, and they had a trowel in the garage, and the trowel was this certain shape of metal, and he thought, if you could roll that up, and you could shrink it down, maybe that could be the scaffolding that you could put into an artery. So that was the brainchild that led him to creating this device. And in that case, the metal stents, those stay forever. But then the stents, because they're metal, there's always going to be endothelial dysfunction when that happens. The body then has to re-endothelialize those stents. But sometimes the body would have a hyper response, and they'd form more scar tissue inside the stent. And so then you'd have to get another balloon or stent to open it back up. Then they invented drug-eluting stents. So the stents had certain compounds on them that slowed that re-endothelialization of the stent. But that came up with another problem, is that then the stents could more likely form blood clots in them while the metal struts are still exposed to the lumen of the blood. But then in the past few years, they have been starting to work with, in larger arteries, some biodegradable stents. But I stepped out of the cath lab 4 years ago, so I don't honestly know exactly how far down the road of they're using those versus the standard of care metal stents. But once a metal stent is in there, it stays there.
Okay. I think the metal stent is still the standard.
Oh yeah, it is the standard. I mean, it's probably 99% of them are still going to be metal. But I think the hope is that they're going to be able to ultimately create better biodegradable ones where you deploy the stent, then over a few months, the stent would degrade, and then the artery would be left with no permanent structures inside of it.
That'd be amazing. I think that'd be a great improvement.
So, more amazing would be don't have the plaques to begin with.
Well, of course.
Right, and then the other thing is that, I was recently at a conference where they were talking about photodynamic therapy with photobiomodulation. Mm-hmm. So using certain compounds that could be given IV or orally, and then they use different IV wavelengths of light to treat certain cancers and some infections. Well, the thought is that in the future, maybe there would be a certain photodynamic therapy that certain plaques would be able to uptake, and then the plaque would uptake it, and you would administer the right wavelength of light, but then would cause the plaque to basically shrink or melt. That would be the future.
That would be amazing. I take back the thing I said about the stents.
Correct.
Dude, that's way better option with the light. Is there already something that's close to that? Like, let's say, infrared therapy?
I mean, you can use photobiomodulation externally to help lower inflammation. You can help bring blood flow to the tissues where the light is being administered. You can activate stem cells in, the sternum or the tibia. That's what they had done in one of the trials, treating heart attack patients with, is activating stem cells, and then the stem cells go repair the damage. So I think there are things that are, more closely going to be ready for the market than the photodynamic therapy plus photomodulation. But that's the future.
Amazing. Well, and then lastly, where can people get more of you? Website? Is it possible to work with you?
Sure. Well, first off, I appreciate the attention to detail. You asked some very good questions, not only in my conventional cardiovascular world, but also had a lot of the good biohacking and quantum health questions as well. So you're well read, so I congratulate you on that. But if people are interested in this type of work, probably the best place to find me is on my website. It's drtwyman.com. It links off to some of my videos about, the 4 pillars of health. All of my contact info is on there. I am on social media somewhat. I basically call it social media the matrix. I go onto the matrix to help unplug those people who are interested in this message, and I get off of the matrix. I don't want to be stuck on the blue world all day long. But mostly it's going to be Instagram for that. Same handle. It's at Dr. Twyman. And generally on Monday nights, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, I will do an IG Live, and there will be a short version of a conversation like this about one of the topics of how to test for endothelial dysfunction, or how to best manage lipoprotein abnormalities, or what's this about blue light and what to do blue light glasses do, kind of have some kind of practical type of things. That's Monday nights, and then the IG Lives are always recorded, so they're always in my feed if people are interested in watching any of the replays. So that's the best way to follow me if you're interested in that. And if people are interested in having me be there for the host in that position, yes, we still are working with patients. The best way to do that would be on our website. There is an application on the page if they're interested.
Perfect. I will link everything in the description section. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome. Thank you.